What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rusto Mod. In a previous episode, you saw me trying to get the Rambler ready to go for Hot Rod Power Tour because we have to leave next month to get ready for Hot Rod Power Tour. We ended up getting the Rambler running and driving after it had been sitting for a long time since we abused the thing at LS Fest. So now that we got the Rambler running and driving, we ended up noticing a bunch of issues with the car. Now we also have the Willys wagon build that we're doing for Hot Rod Power Tour as well. So we have two cars to get ready to go for Hot Rod Power Tour. So we have a lot to do. Now, if you saw the last episode, you saw, unfortunately, the hood of the Rambler came up and smashed the roof and ended up bending the hood, which could have been a lot worse, but luckily we have some guys that are going to be able to fix it. So we're not too worried about it. I mean, look at the rest of the car. But it is a really big bummer and definitely a big mistake on my end. And you also saw that this tire ended up going flat because it ended up getting cut on something in the suspension in the back. This is a reoccurring issue that we've been having with this car. This is probably the second or third tire I've replaced on this, and we've aligned the suspension, so we're not really sure what is the issue, because whenever you put the car up in the air, the suspension actually droops down, so it's kind of hard to see what it's hitting. Now, I did get a spare tire to replace it, no big deal. But if you saw the last episode, you also saw that the big issue with this car is the wiring harness. Now, the wiring harness in this thing is an absolute mess, so we want to redo the whole harness with the same American Auto Wire style harness that we use in the C10. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do to this car is replace the fuel cell in it because it was filled with that foam. The foam ended up breaking down at LS Fest and clogging all the fuel filters and all the fuel lines in this thing. So I have to replace the entire fuel system as well before we drive this thing all the way to Atlanta, then to North Carolina, South Carolina, and then to Tennessee on Hot Rod Power Tour. So we have a lot of work to do on this thing, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get the entire thing done in time before we leave for LS Fest because we have the Willys wagon under construction as well. And I'll show you guys a look at that as well. Alright, so if you guys saw the other episodes on the channel of us building this Willys wagon, it's been sitting up here on the lift because we are still working on this thing. And the episodes are probably a few months behind, just so I can keep up on videos. But this thing is almost done. We have to wire the inside, everything else is wired, and do carpet and little detail stuff, but it should be ready to go. So we're just finished welding some little things on it, just like some steps on the sides and stuff that isn't crucial but is nice to have and stuff like that. So this thing is not too far from driving down the road. We have just probably a few more weeks and she'll be ready to go. But that few more weeks that we're working on this is time that is going to be taken away from working on the Rambler and getting that thing ready to go. So I don't know if we're going to have time to wire the entire harness and change the entire fuel system so that we're comfortable driving it so far out of the way. Now, we're not going to completely give up on it. We actually have installed seats and did a bunch of other stuff to the interior, little stuff that I could do, so that way we can have everything ready to go, so whenever the Rambler is ready to be put up on the lift when we're done with the Willys, we can start working on it. So all the Rambler episodes will still come out and we're still going to get that thing finished because we need to do the entire interior and get that thing back on the road. But I don't know if we're going to be able to take it to Hot Rod Power Tour this year. And it might be better in the long run because next year I think it's supposed to be a little bit more local to us. So it might be a better drive. And we plan on driving that thing to LS Fest in September. So either way, we're going to do some road trips in that car. But just in case we don't get it done, the only other car that we have to drive is our all-wheel drive C10. Now, the C10 behind me is actually pretty good. It's almost ready to go. And whenever I drive to a local car meet or a car show or something like that, I always take the C10 because it always fires right up and runs and drives. But the only issue with the car is it doesn't run on pump gas. I actually had this thing tuned on E85 and I never set up a flex fuel sensor for it, so I've never been able to run on pump gas. There's a local E85 pump I just always go to, and I've never had the ability to run it on pump gas. So for us to drive it on Power Tour, we're gonna have to fix the entire flex fuel system in the thing so that way we can run pump gas and not E85. All right, I'm sure by now everybody knows what the deal is on this truck. It's a 1968 Chevrolet C10 on top of a 2007 Cadillac Escalade frame, and it is all-wheel drive. But not only is it all-wheel drive, it's turbocharged. And so that's kind of my big dilemma with this, because I'm not really that comfortable with driving this thing all the way down there if I have an issue with something that has to do with boost. Now, we can easily bypass a lot of this stuff, but my main issue, and if you talk to anybody that does hot rod power tour before, is sitting in lines, sitting in traffic, and driving this thing across country basically, and dealing with heat. So for instance, our entire turbo kit runs right down and then comes underneath and then comes up on the other side, so, and then all the way back. So we have a lot of heat in the front of the engine basically surrounding the radiator, and that's not a big deal. I mean, it never really gets super hot. The hottest thing this thing has gotten was sitting in traffic. It got up to like 210, something like that, and honestly that's not super hot for these motors. They are actually made to run a little bit hotter, but it's a little bit more warm than I would like. Now, I do have a 3-core radiator in it, and it seems to work pretty good. I've never had too many overheating issues unless it was run really hard or sitting for hours idling in traffic with no airflow. So the coolant system is something that I definitely want to go over before we drive it, but there are some other things that I want to get done to this thing if we're actually going to take this on power tour. Now, I put this car up in the air real quick with our quick jacks just to see how everything looked underneath. And if you guys saw a previous episode, we actually installed aftermarket control arms to be able to adjust the camber on the front of the car. Now, that helped a ton because it lowered the front suspension, it helped with camber, but it put our CV axles in the front at a kind of a weird angle. And they're actually really low, and the car is still really low how it is. And because of that, I ended up ripping both of the CV boots in the front, and I just noticed that. So if you guys are looking to do that, make sure you don't go as low as we are. And our max Patina rod coilovers are definitely sagging after driving these things for quite a while, so we're going to have to raise it up, which isn't a huge deal. But I'm also going to replace both the front axles and both the front wheel bearing hubs, so that way we won't have to worry about it. I'm going to raise it up a little bit so that way the ride quality is a little bit better and it drives down the road nice, so we don't break our backs bottoming out while we're driving all the way to hot rod power tour. I actually raised the rear up a little bit the other day. It's a little bit higher than I really like, but it rides so much better. Before, it was bottoming out on the bump stops, and every time you hit a bump it would just be a horrible bang on the frame, and our cage is tied right into where the frame would be, so it sends that shock wave up right through the cab, and it's just not good. So I raised it up a little bit. I really like how low it sits, but you know, you got to do what you got to do if you want to be able to survive a trip like this. We want to go for longevity on this and not necessarily performance, because I'm just trying to make it back with no issues. Now, another thing I did notice when we put it up in the air is this thing is covered with oil underneath, and that reason is because I never put a locking dipstick on this car. It just has a normal LS dipstick, aftermarket dipstick that doesn't have a locking dipstick, and this being my first turbo build, didn't really know the issues of crankcase pressure, but now I definitely do. And I have a breather on this valve cover, and I was going to put one on this side, but I never got to it. And I have a catch can here, but I don't think that that's going to be enough for the amount of boost that we're running. So I ended up getting a locking dipstick, and I got some different valve covers that offer a lot more flow, so we can get this crankcase pressure issue resolved. And I have a breather on both valve covers, so it actually has a port on my catch can for another side of the motor. So I'm going to put both valve covers with breathers on, so that way this thing can flow a ton of air and won't have any crankcase pressure issues, or at least minimize those issues, so we won't have any issues there going down the road. Now, I also got the locking dipstick so I don't spray oil everywhere, and hopefully that solves that issue. Now, another thing I want to get done before we go to power tour is fix this transmission. Now, I have put a different transmission in it than previous episodes because that transmission company I wasn't happy with, and I just went with a Craigslist rebuilt 4L80 that somebody had put aftermarket clutches in and a converter, and actually ended up working really well. It's held the power. Whenever we dynoed it, it was on this transmission. The reason I took it out was because the pump seal ended up blowing out. I fixed that, put it back in, and it's been great ever since. Now, my biggest issue with the other transmission was it wouldn't go into lockup. So this converter in this is a lockup converter, and it actually works, and it works really good. But the issue is it has a really bad vibration whenever it goes into lockup. So if you guys know anything about that, comment down below, because that's my biggest problem with this right now. This vibration, it doesn't sound like it's coming from the transmission. It could be from the engine just at that RPM. But whatever frequency is happening with the motor at a lower RPM cruising down the highway, it's really bad. So whenever we're going down the highway, I want to get that fixed before we leave. That's one of the biggest problems with this car right now with driving it. I just have the lockup turned off and it drives fine, but we're tacking like 2,500 RPM at 60 miles an hour, and we need to crank those numbers down so we can get better fuel mileage. The Rambler is still getting done. The C10 is probably going to be our plan B and most likely candidate to drive on power tour. So that's a little scary just because of what it is, but we'll probably be fine. Hopefully you guys will see what is going to happen on our power tour videos. We're going to be filming every day and taking you guys along to show you guys what happens on power tour when you do extensive builds like the C10, the Jeep, and the Rambler, and how they manage to do a cross-country drive like this. So now that I've talked enough in this video, you guys know what is happening. I'm gonna start getting to work on these things so that way we can get these things ready to go, because we have less than a month to get these things on the road. All right, now the first thing I'm gonna do on this thing is decrease everything. Like I said, everything on this thing has been coated with oil because the dipstick kept blowing out oil. So I'm gonna use our Super Clean that our friends over at Super Clean ended up sending us. So make sure you go check them out. I'll link them down in the description. But we're gonna coat this thing with some degreaser, clean off all the oil that's all over this thing, so that way it's not a gross mess whenever we go to work on it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is replace these coil packs. These coil packs actually came off of a Junkyard 5.3 and they've worked for now, but I saw one of these were arcing across to the body of the coil pack. I have to start it up, see if we can see it again, but I just was like, well, they've been here for this long, probably going to just replace them, be safe. That way we don't chance anything on the road. All right, try to check this out to see if you can see this coil pack arcing. It's really weird. Hopefully you can see that, but the coil pack is arcing right on the bracket. So we're gonna just replace them all, if you can see that. Hopefully that's causing an issue for this vibration that we have. All right, hopefully you guys can see that, but it looks like there's an arc off of this coil pack right here. Oh, it looks like it's actually cracked. Anyway, we're gonna pull them off, inspect them, and we'll keep them as spares, but I definitely want to replace them because it could be leading to some issues. All right, here's that coil pack that was arcing. Kind of weird. It's like a little divot in it. Not really sure what caused it, but it was running fine, like I said, on high RPM, and I mean, you couldn't really tell if it was running bad at lower RPM just because the lockup converter never worked until you put it on and have a vibration. So I don't know if that's causing a misfire, causing the vibration, but I'll put the new coil packs in and then we can test it on the road and see if it's still there. All right, got a box with our new coil packs in it, so let's throw them in real quick. Okay, got this side of the coil packs put on. Hopefully that makes a difference with our tuning. I also pulled the spark plug wires off just to check them, make sure that they were all good because it is really close to the downpipe right here. They run behind this exhaust, so it's hard to see them because everything's hot. And I put some heat shield and stuff on them, but that's another thing that I want to do is try to look at all the spark plug wires, make sure that they're in a good spot where they're not going to get burned up or anything. So anyway, I want to take it for a drive, try to mess with this lockup converter and see if it makes a difference. So let's pull it out and see if we fix something. Yeah. All right, so I changed the coil packs. It does seem to run smoother, and I hope that this is the problem. So I'm going to go to transmission, the TCC parameters here, and I'm going to uncheck torque converter disable, and we'll just see what that does. So we're going to drive it around, see if it makes a difference. All right. So we're at first now, and I just want to tell you it shifted, so second. Lockup. The lockup, usually before, it would have a horrible vibration, but it's smooth now, so that coil pack was definitely the problem, so I'm really happy we got that fixed. All right, just pulled this thing around, drove it, and we fixed the issue. I wish I had filmed what it was doing before, but definitely that coil pack was bad. I think this thing was only running on 7 cylinders. It feels so much smoother and responsive. Maybe it was, you know, 7.5 cylinders, but it is so much better now. I'm really glad that lockup makes a huge difference. Driving this thing, it was tacking probably 2,500 RPM at 60 miles an hour. Now we're at like 1,800 RPM. So I'm beyond stoked. That is a huge difference. That's gonna make a giant difference at power tour when we drive this thing. So we'll do a little bit more road testing, see what other stuff we have to fix. I wanna do some cooling stuff. Now that it's, you know, drove it around some, it's definitely hot under the hood. So gotta get these temperatures down. All my exhaust wrap came off there. And then I gotta probably rewrap this side, so trying to cool it off as much as possible, but we are on the right track. This thing, I feel much more confident in driving this car now, so who knows? I think this is we're gonna probably take on power tour, but we'll see. All right, so we got the C10 back in the shop, put it on my quick jacks. Just got these things. Definitely a useful tool. While we have 2 projects in the shop, one's on the lift. I can just work on this a lot easier with the quick jacks. But anyway, I'm just gonna raise these coilovers up a little bit just because I'm rubbing and we don't want to blow out any tires on the trip. Also, on the other side, my wheel was hitting the turbo. It was so low. So I think these coilovers are definitely sagging while we drive them. So we're gonna raise them up, and then in the back I actually raised them up already, but I'm gonna probably lower them like a 1/2 inch. So we're gonna do that real quick, put it on the ground, see how it drives, and that should be it for this episode. All right, got that other side done. Now on the driver's side, you can see we're scraping the turbo here. And we're scraping up here on this fender liner bolt. So the coilovers definitely have sagged down. So I'm going to try to raise it up so we don't have this problem. But definitely something that we're gonna have to keep an eye on. So anyway, I'll raise this side up and then set it down. All right, lower it down, trying to figure out if it made a difference. Oh, I think it raised it up. I think it was on the wheel before. Like the body line. What does this sound look like?
It's like right on the trim. Like
yeah, that's probably about right. Let's look underneath the hood. Because before it was hitting here. Oh yeah, look, it was hitting here before. It's definitely higher than it was, but I'm not upset. I mean, it rides a lot better. And once we load it down with all of our stuff we're gonna bring to power tour, it'll settle back down. All right, guys, I drove this thing home and it drives great. I am so happy that it was that coil pack was the issue. And I guess it was running on 7.5 cylinders the whole time. So that's a big step. Getting the lockup converter working shifts really nice now. And the whole thing is a lot more responsive. So now we have a little bit more stuff to do, but this car is pretty good. And I would feel pretty comfortable driving it long distance like Power Tour. So we're gonna have to do some heat management and some other little things to it, but it should be pretty good to go on Power Tour. Now you will see us try to fix some stuff on the Rambler and on this in the coming weeks, because both of those we're gonna try to get ready for Power Tour, and the Willys Jeep. So we have a lot of work to do. We got the C10, trying to get the Rambler wired, and the Willys. We have a ton of stuff coming down the line. So you'll see all that stuff on the next episode of Rustle Mod. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to check out our Patina Party Car Show August 13th at Maryland International Raceway, where you can see all these cars that we've been working on, and hopefully we'll see you guys on the road on Power Tour. See you then.